A 17-year-old girl took on a part-time job during her summer break and mysteriously disappeared without a trace. For months, police and dozens of residents from her small town searched everywhere, but it was like she had vanished off the face of the earth. Meanwhile, investigators were unraveling a tangled web of strange and conflicting clues until they finally uncovered the shocking truth. Valerie Tyndall was born on August 29, 2005, in Indianapolis, Indiana. She had a big, loving family, her parents, a brother, and 4 sisters. At some point, they decided to leave the big city and move to a tiny town called Arlington, about an hour's drive from Indianapolis. With only a few hundred residents, Arlington was a quiet, peaceful, and safe place. Valerie enrolled in the local school, made friends, and grew to love the small-town life. As a teenager, she started taking on various part-time jobs to earn her first paycheck. She initially worked at local restaurants before landing a job with a lawn mowing company. This job was perfect for her. It had a flexible schedule that fit well with her school hours, and operating a lawnmower didn't require any special skills or much effort. By 2023, when Valerie was 17, she was working hard to get good grades so she could get into a college to become a veterinarian. She had loved animals since childhood and had long dreams of becoming a vet. That summer, during her school break, she was busy researching colleges and continued mowing lawns to save up as much money as she could before heading off to college. On June 7th, Valerie told her parents she was heading to work, said goodbye, and left. Her mom expected her to be home in a few hours, but as the day went on, it became clear that something was wrong. Valerie wasn't answering her phone, and as evening approached, her mom decided to call her boss. Valerie worked for a neighbor and family friend, Patrick. To her surprise, Patrick told her that not only had Valerie not shown up for work, but she didn't even have a shift scheduled that day. This news made Valerie's parents even more worried. They feared something bad might have happened but held on to hope. Her mom considered the possibility that Valerie might have lied about going to work and instead spent the day with friends, even though she'd never done anything like that before. In the end, they decided to wait, hoping their daughter would come home soon. They also called everyone she knew, but no one had seen her that day. So by the next morning, when Valerie still hadn't returned, they decided it was time to call the police. After speaking with Valerie's parents, the police considered the possibility that she might have gone somewhere secretly or even run away from home. Her mom mentioned that Valerie usually didn't work on Wednesdays, but she assumed her daughter had just picked up an extra shift that day. The officers also talked to her boss, who confirmed that Valerie had no scheduled work that day and had last worked on Tuesday. The police questioned her friends and acquaintances, but none of them had seen Valerie or spent time with her. Given the small size of their town, the officers quickly interviewed everyone Valerie might have been with, but it led nowhere. The only lead they managed to find was a witness who saw Valerie driving by around noon on the day she disappeared. But unfortunately, this didn't bring them any closer to finding out where she was. As days passed without any sign of Valerie, the police became increasingly convinced that she wasn't going to return home on her own. Investigators began focusing on 2 main theories: that she had either run away or that foul play was involved. Valerie's parents were skeptical about the idea of her running away. There were no issues at home, and she had been working hard in school to achieve her dream of becoming a veterinarian. However, the thought of her running away still gave them a glimmer of hope that she was alive and safe, because the alternative was far worse. For several weeks, the police, along with Valerie's family and volunteers, searched tirelessly around their town. Authorities also asked local residents to help locate Valerie's car. The fact that no one had spotted her vehicle in the small town suggested that Valerie had driven it out of Arlington herself, or someone had hidden it. Nearly 3 weeks later, on June 26th, the police finally found Valerie's car parked at an apartment complex in Shelbyville, about 20 miles from Arlington. The license plates were missing and the doors were locked. There were no signs of a struggle or any useful clues inside the car, but detectives quickly uncovered an interesting detail. The apartment complex where the car was found was a client of the lawn mowing company where Valerie worked. Despite this, Valerie's boss, Patrick, had insisted she wasn't scheduled to work that day. The investigators began to suspect that he might be hiding something and started looking more closely at him. After interviewing residents in the area around the apartment complex, they found another witness who had seen Valerie on the day she disappeared. But she wasn't alone. Her boss, Patrick, was in the car with her. Hearing this, the detectives went to question Patrick. He stuck to his story, claiming he hadn't seen Valerie that day. But when the police informed him that a witness had placed him with Valerie and that her car had been found, his story suddenly changed. Patrick admitted that he had indeed seen Valerie that day. According to his new version of events, they met up in Shelbyville and Valerie asked him to drive her to a small town called Homer a few miles from Arlington. She claimed she was planning to run away from home and that someone would be waiting for her there. Once they arrived, Valerie got out of his car and into another vehicle driven by an unknown man, and they drove off together. Patrick added that the next day, he picked up Valerie's car and left it in the parking lot of the apartment complex where the police later found it. He insisted that he was only trying to help her. But investigators quickly spotted inconsistencies in his story. They had already checked the location data from Valerie's phone, which showed that it had last been active in Arlington, not in any other town. This suggested that something might have happened to her in Arlington, and they confronted Patrick with this information. To their surprise, Patrick changed his story again. This time, he claimed that they met near the apartment complex in Shelbyville, after which Valerie got into his car and they drove to his house. He then left Valerie at his home alone when he went to work, and when he returned, she was gone. Naturally, the detectives found this version even less credible than his previous ones. They asked Patrick to hand over his phone, and he agreed. The detectives found text messages exchanged with Valerie on the day she disappeared. At 11:23 a.m., Valerie had sent him a message saying, "I'll be there soon." And a few hours later, Patrick had replied, "Where are you?" He sent the same message again a little later, but there was no response. All of this raised serious suspicions, and the detectives were highly doubtful of Patrick's truthfulness. They decided to speak with Valerie's parents to ask if they had noticed anything unusual about Patrick's behavior. Valerie's mom shared that Patrick did sometimes act strangely. He had built a close friendship with Valerie, spending time with her outside of work, giving her gifts, and even taking her shopping. Sometimes, the 59-year-old man seemed to behave more like a jealous boyfriend than a boss. However, Valerie's mom didn't take these concerns too seriously. Patrick was a close family friend, and Valerie was friends with his daughter, so her mother assumed he was just being supportive. Yet, one particular incident stood out to her as especially suspicious. Patrick once invited Valerie to visit an aquarium in another city. Her parents allowed her to go, thinking that Patrick was taking his entire family. But they later found out that he went alone with Valerie, which her parents found quite odd. Valerie's mom also mentioned that on the night of June 7th, Patrick and his wife came over to visit their house, where he suggested that Valerie might have run away and might never come back. She also brought up one curious detail that caught the detective's attention. Patrick had been tracking Valerie's phone location through a special app. He claimed this was for work purposes, but the detectives immediately noticed something strange. If Patrick could simply open the app and see where Valerie was, why did he send her several messages asking, "Where are you?" on the day she disappeared? After piecing together all the information, the detectives were nearly convinced of Patrick's involvement in Valerie's disappearance. However, with only circumstantial evidence and no clear idea of Valerie's current whereabouts, they couldn't yet hold him accountable. Still, the police decided to arrest Patrick for providing false statements as he had broken the law by lying about not seeing Valerie on the day she vanished. He was formally charged, and the police continued to think what to do next. This move was largely driven by the detectives' hope that after his arrest, Patrick might eventually tell them the truth, but he continued to insist that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. The next step was to obtain a warrant to search Patrick's home, but this process proved difficult. Without any solid evidence, it took several months. Eventually, the police uncovered another suspicious detail. Several of Patrick's neighbors reported that the day after Valerie disappeared, he dismantled and burned his garage in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. Finally, on October 11th, the police secured a warrant and went to search Patrick's property. His house sat on a vast piece of land with a pond in the middle. for search dogs immediately indicated that there was a scent of human remains coming from the water, so investigators focused their search there. However, no remains were found in the water. The expert suggested that a body might have been near the pond at some point, causing the scent to seep into the water. The police then expanded their search across the property. They requested a helicopter equipped with ground-penetrating radar, and from the data collected, they created a map highlighting areas with some signs of digging. Given the size of the property, the search extended for several weeks. This continued until November 28th, when the police focused their attention on a large pile of construction debris mixed with soil. After clearing the debris, they uncovered 2 wooden crates beneath it. The first contained old VHS tapes and documents, though the police have not yet disclosed their contents. In the second crate, they found human remains wrapped in black garbage bags. The level of decomposition made it impossible to visually identify the person, but the detectives noticed the nails of the deceased were painted in the same color as Valerie's on the day she disappeared. The remains were sent to medical examiners, who quickly confirmed that they belonged to Valerie Tyndall. Following this confirmation, Patrick was charged with her murder, and the detectives brought him in for questioning. Now that Valerie's body had been found on his property, Patrick did not deny his involvement. However, his account once again raised serious doubts. According to his account, they met that day near the apartment complex in Shelbyville for work, after which they went to his home, where his office was also located. Patrick claimed that Valerie began to blackmail him. He insisted that she had been trying to seduce him for some time and that, on that day, she demanded a new car. If he didn't comply, she threatened to tell everyone he had seduced her, destroying his life. Patrick said he panicked and a heated argument ensued, escalating into a physical struggle. In the midst of this, he grabbed his belt and strangled Valerie. Afterward, he moved her body to his office and hid it there. The next day, he went to a store, purchased some wooden boards, and made 2 makeshift coffins. In one, he placed Valerie's body, and in the other, he stored documents and old videotapes. He also wrapped the body in garbage bags and duct tape to mask the odor of decomposition. Patrick then decided to hide the crates in a pit that was already on his property. But he needed something to cover them. So he used the construction debris, which was plenty on his land, and buried the coffins under a layer of soil to secure them. As for the burned garage, the purpose of his action remains unclear. Given that he burned it shortly after the murder and in the middle of the night, it likely has some connection to the crime. Perhaps he needed to destroy certain evidence, and the garage demolition was just a cover for the large fire. It's worth noting that the pit where he buried Valerie's body was only 100 yards from her parents' home, who had been searching for their daughter for almost 6 months. When police asked him how he felt after committing the murder, Patrick calmly stated that nothing in his life had really changed. Naturally, the detectives were skeptical of his entire story. It all seemed like Patrick was trying to portray himself as the victim, justifying his actions by claiming he was being blackmailed. A far more likely scenario was that Patrick had been ingratiating himself with Valerie for some time, hoping for a romantic relationship. On the day of the murder, he might have brought her to his home and attempted to initiate an intimate encounter. But when Valerie refused, he panicked at the thought she might tell her parents and decided to kill her. Another detail that cast doubt on Patrick's version of events was the testimony from Valerie's relatives. They mentioned that she loved her car and even said once that she wanted to drive it for the rest of her life. This made Patrick's story about being blackmailed for a new car seem even less believable. After charges were brought against Patrick, detectives uncovered several more intriguing pieces of evidence that further built the case against him. A thorough examination of his smartphone revealed that shortly after arriving home on the day of the murder, Patrick began deleting apps from his device. Although he failed to remove his health app, which recorded a significant spike in his heart rate for several minutes shortly after his arrival. Investigators believe that this was the moment when he killed Valerie and moved her body. Patrick also admitted to disposing of the license plates from Valerie's car and her keys by throwing them into a river, intending to make it harder for the police to locate the vehicle. He also revealed a chilling detail. After strangling Valerie with his belt, he just put it back on and continued wearing it as if nothing had happened. The victim's parents were devastated to learn that their neighbor and friend was her killer. They admitted that they had never truly believed Patrick was involved, despite his strange behavior. It's important to note that detectives had kept most of the information from the parents to avoid compromising the investigation. So many details only came to light after Patrick's arrest. When Patrick was placed in jail awaiting trial and was appointed a lawyer, he didn't attempt to retract his confession, as is often the case. Instead, he and his lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Patrick would plead guilty to the murder, and in exchange, the charges of giving false information for which he was originally arrested would be dropped. Thanks to this deal, Patrick stood before the judge on March 11, 2024, just a few months after his arrest, and was sentenced to 57 years in prison. While the victim's family didn't have to endure years of waiting for the trial and the defense's attempts to justify Patrick's actions, the plea deal came with a significant drawback. Typically, such agreements don't require the guilty party to disclose all the details of their crime. Patrick only needed to admit his guilt in the murder. Because of this, Valerie's parents may never know the real reasons behind the crime, even if the investigator's theory seems closest to the truth. As for Patrick's family, they too were horrified when the police discovered Valerie's body on their property. His wife and children, including his daughter, who had been friends with the victim, had lived just yards away from her remains for nearly 6 months, completely unaware. The plea deal also means we may never learn what was on the tapes that Patrick buried in the second coffin alongside Valerie. It's possible their content could have brought additional trouble or even criminal charges, and Patrick may have feared that the police would search his home following Valerie's disappearance. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. At the heart of this tragic tale were two sisters, Jessica and Cassandra Lawrence, whose lives had been intertwined in a complex web of love, rivalry, and resentment. Since childhood, Cassandra, the elder of the two, had always been the golden child, beautiful, accomplished, and married to the charming and successful architect Dominic Blunt. Their union was the envy of Millhaven, a seemingly perfect marriage that everyone aspired to emulate. Jessica and Cassandra were born into a family of moderate means. Their father, a local fisherman, and their mother, a schoolteacher. From an early age, it was clear that the two sisters were as different as night and day. Cassandra, with her gentle demeanor, was the pride of her parents. She excelled in school, was beloved by her teachers, and seemed to navigate the social waters of Millhaven with effortless grace. Her path in life seemed predetermined. She would go to college, find a respectable job, and settle down with a good man to start a family of her own. Jessica, however, was a force of nature from the moment she could walk. She possessed a wild spirit that both intrigued and unsettled those around her. While equally intelligent as her sister, Jessica's academic achievements were overshadowed by her rebellious nature and penchant for pushing boundaries. As they grew older, the differences between the sisters only became more pronounced. Cassandra pursued a degree in education, following in her mother's footsteps, while Jessica bounced between various majors, never quite finding her place. It was during this time that Jessica's manipulative tendencies began to surface. She would charm her way out of trouble, using her wit and allure to bend situations to her advantage. Jessica's relationships were always intense but short-lived. She seemed to thrive on the chaos of new romances, only to grow bored once the initial excitement faded. This pattern left a trail of broken hearts and bitter exes in her wake, further cementing her reputation as the black sheep of Millhaven. Cassandra, meanwhile, had returned to her hometown after college and quickly caught the eye of Dominic Blunt, a rising star in the world of architecture. Dominic had come to Millhaven to oversee the restoration of the town's historic lighthouse, but found himself captivated by the town's gentle beauty, both in its landscape and in Cassandra herself. Their courtship was swift and passionate, culminating in a fairy tale wedding that was the talk of the town for months. Dominic's career continued to flourish, and soon he and Cassandra were living in a beautiful home overlooking the ocean, their life together seeming like a modern-day fairy tale. But beneath the surface of their perfect marriage, cracks were beginning to form. Cassandra, always the dutiful daughter and wife, found herself yearning for something more. She had given up her own dreams of travel and adventure to settle in Millhaven, and a part of her resented the sacrifices she had made for the sake of her marriage. Dominic, for his part, was battling his own demons. The pressure of his high-profile career and the expectations of small-town life weighed heavily on him. He loved Cassandra deeply, but there were moments when he felt suffocated by the perfection they were expected to maintain. It was into this delicate balance that Jessica re-entered their lives. Having spent years drifting from city to city, she returned to Millhaven, claiming to want to reconnect with her roots. In reality, she was running from yet another failed relationship and mounting debts, seeking refuge in the only place she knew would take her in. Cassandra, ever the loving sister, welcomed Jessica with open arms, offering her a place to stay until she got back on her feet. But as Jessica settled into life in the Blunt household, the dynamics between the three began to shift in subtle yet profound ways. The stage was set for a drama that would shake Millhaven to its very core, forever altering the lives of all involved. At first, her presence seemed to breathe new life into Cassandra and Dominic's relationship. Evenings were filled with laughter and reminiscence as the sisters caught up on lost time, with Dominic playing the role of the attentive husband and brother-in-law. But as days turned to weeks, Jessica's true intentions began to surface. Her eyes would linger on Dominic a moment too long, her casual touches becoming more frequent and deliberate. She would find excuses to be alone with him, asking for help with her car, seeking advice on job applications, or simply catching him in the kitchen late at night when Cassandra had already gone to bed. Dominic, initially oblivious to Jessica's advances, found himself increasingly drawn to her vibrant personality. Where Cassandra was steady and predictable, Jessica was spontaneous and exciting. She listened with rapt attention to his architectural designs, asking insightful questions that made him feel truly understood. In those moments, Dominic felt a spark he hadn't experienced in years. Dominic was a man of principle, devoted to his wife and the life they had built together. He tried to distance himself from Jessica, making excuses to spend more time at the office or taking on additional projects that kept him away from home. Jessica, however, was not so easily deterred. She recognized the internal struggle in Dominic's eyes, and saw it as a challenge rather than a deterrent. She began to weave a careful web of seduction, playing on his insecurities and unfulfilled desires. One evening, as Cassandra attended a school board meeting, Jessica orchestrated a seemingly innocent dinner with Dominic. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of expensive wine, and created an atmosphere of intimacy that was hard to resist. As they talked late into the night, Jessica carefully steered the conversation towards Dominic's passions and dreams, areas where she knew Cassandra had never fully connected with him. Dominic felt a rush of emotions, flattery, desire, and overwhelming guilt. He stammered a response, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Jessica had already sensed her advantage. She leaned in closer, her hand brushing against his. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be truly understood? To be with someone who sees you for who you really are?" The tension in the room was palpable. Dominic knew he should leave, should put an end to this dangerous game before it went too far, but something kept him rooted to the spot, caught in the gravitational pull of Jessica's allure. As Jessica's lips met his in a passionate kiss, Dominic's resistance crumbled. In that moment, the foundation of his marriage began to crack, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. The weeks following that fateful night were a blur of stolen moments and mounting guilt for Dominic. What had begun as a momentary lapse in judgment quickly spiraled into a full-blown affair, with Jessica and Dominic finding increasingly creative ways to be together without arousing Cassandra's suspicions. Their rendezvous ranged from hurried encounters in Dominic's office to carefully planned business trips that allowed them to escape the watchful eyes of Millhaven. Jessica reveled in the thrill of their forbidden romance, each secret meeting fueling her sense of triumph over her sister. For Dominic, the affair was an intoxicating mixture of excitement and self-loathing, each encounter leaving him both exhilarated and racked with guilt. Jessica, ever the master manipulator, knew exactly how to keep Dominic ensnared. She played the role of the perfect lover, alternating between passionate temptress and vulnerable confidant. She would listen to his frustrations about work and his unfulfilled ambitions, offering the understanding and validation he craved. "I've never met anyone like you, Dominic," she would whisper in their intimate moments. "You deserve so much more than this small town can offer you." Her words were carefully chosen, planting seeds of discontent in Dominic's mind about his life with Cassandra. She painted vivid pictures of the future they could have together, a life of excitement and passion, free from the constraints of small-town expectations. Dominic found himself increasingly torn between his growing feelings for Jessica and his loyalty to Cassandra. The double life he was leading began to take its toll, manifesting in mood swings and uncharacteristic behavior that didn't go unnoticed by his wife at home. Dominic's guilt manifested in a mixture of emotional distance and overcompensation. There were days when he could barely look Cassandra in the eye, and others where he would shower her with affection. Driven by remorse, he threw himself into his work, taking on more projects than ever before, using his career as both an escape and an excuse for his frequent absences. Jessica, for her part, played the role of the doting sister-in-law to perfection. She would engage Cassandra in long conversations, feigning interest in her day-to-day life while secretly reveling in her deception. There were moments when a flicker of guilt would cross Jessica's face, a brief recognition of the pain she was causing her sister, but these moments were quickly suppressed, overshadowed by her desire for Dominic and her deep-seated need to finally outshine Cassandra. As the affair progressed, the risks they took became greater. They began meeting in more public places, their need for each other overriding their caution. There were close calls. A neighbor who almost caught them in an embrace, a colleague of Cassandra's who saw them dining together in a neighboring town. Each near discovery only added to the intensity of their relationship, the danger becoming part of the allure. But as weeks turned to months, the strain of their deception began to show. Dominic, once energized by the affair, now found himself constantly on edge. The guilt was eating away at him, affecting his work and his relationships with friends and family. He began to question whether the passion he felt for Jessica was worth the destruction of the life he had built with Cassandra. Jessica, sensing Dominic's internal struggle, doubled down on her efforts to keep him engaged. She became more demanding of his time, more insistent in her declarations of love. Her manipulations became more overt, playing on his guilt and his desires in equal measure. As their affair reached its fever pitch, neither Jessica nor Dominic realized that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down. The truth, as it often does, was quietly making its way to the surface, ready to shatter the lives of all involved. While Jessica and Dominic were lost in their passionate affair, Cassandra was slowly piecing together a puzzle she never wanted to solve. At first, the changes were subtle. A lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on Dominic's clothes, hushed phone conversations that would abruptly end when she entered the room, and an emotional distance that seemed to grow with each passing day. Cassandra, ever the optimist, initially chalked these changes up to work stress or a midlife crisis. She tried to bridge the growing gap between them, planning romantic dinners and weekend getaways, only to be met with half-hearted enthusiasm from Dominic. Her sister Jessica, ironically, became her confidant during this time, offering sympathetic ears and reassurances that only served to twist the knife of betrayal deeper. But as weeks turned to months, Cassandra could no longer ignore the nagging voice in the back of her mind. She began to pay closer attention to the inconsistencies in Dominic's stories. About late nights at the office and out-of-town meetings, she noticed the way Jessica's eyes would follow Dominic across a room, the barely concealed hunger in her gaze. One afternoon, while doing laundry, Cassandra found a matchbook from a hotel in a neighboring city tucked into the pocket of Dominic's jacket. A hotel she knew wasn't anywhere near his usual business haunts. The discovery sent a chill down her spine, the physical evidence making it impossible to deny her worst fears any longer. Torn between confronting her suspicions and the fear of what she might uncover, Cassandra found herself in a state of constant anxiety. She began to withdraw from friends and colleagues, unable to bear the thought of sharing her suspicions and making them real. Her sleep was plagued by nightmares, and she found herself watching Dominic and Jessica like a hawk, searching for any sign that would confirm or deny her fears. In a moment of desperation, Cassandra even considered hiring a private investigator, but the thought of strangers prying into her private life was too much to bear. Instead, she decided to confront Dominic and Jessica separately, hoping that one of them would crack under the pressure and reveal the truth. Little did Cassandra know that her decision to seek the truth would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a confrontation more devastating than she could have ever imagined, forever altering the course of all their lives. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy afternoon in late autumn. She had spent the morning steeling herself for this moment, rehearsing what she would say, how she would remain calm and collected in the face of potential heartbreak. When Dominic walked through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he was met with the sight of his wife standing in the room, her face a mask of barely contained emotion. The tension in the air was palpable, and he knew instantly that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. "We need to talk," she began, her voice quavering slightly despite her best efforts. "I know about you and Jessica." The color drained from Dominic's face, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. In that moment of stunned silence, Cassandra saw the truth written plainly across his features, and her last shred of hope evaporated. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been sleeping with my sister?" Dominic's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew there was no point in denying it any longer. "Cassandra, I'm so sorry it just happened." Cassandra cut him off with a bitter laugh. "You never meant to? What, did you trip and fall into her bed? How could you do this?" The floodgates opened, and months of pent-up suspicion and hurt came pouring out. Cassandra hurled accusations and questions at Dominic, her voice echoing through the house. Dominic, for his part, could only stand there and absorb her fury, offering weak apologies that did nothing to stem the tide of her anger. As their argument reached a fever pitch, the front door opened and Jessica walked in, stopping short at the scene before her. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of betrayal and guilt. "Jessica, how kind of you to join us. We were just discussing your affair with my husband." Jessica's eyes darted between Cassandra and Dominic, her mind racing to find a way out of this situation. Dominic, torn between the two sisters, tried to intervene. "Please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally." His words only served to redirect Cassandra's fury. In a fit of rage, Cassandra grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing Dominic's head. It shattered against the wall, the crash punctuating her words. The noise seemed to snap Jessica out of her defiant stance. For the first time, a flicker of remorse crossed her face. Dominic and Jessica exchanged a look of helpless guilt before slowly making their way to the door. As it closed behind them, Cassandra collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. The life she had known, the future she had planned, it had all crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. As the storm raged outside, Cassandra's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, shame, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. In that moment, she made a decision that would set in motion the final tragic act of this sordid drama. The bartender, a grizzled man named Hank, watched with growing concern as Cassandra knocked back drink after drink. He had seen his fair share of patrons drowning their sorrows, but something about the wild look in Cassandra's eyes set him on edge. "Another," Cassandra demanded, her words slightly slurred. Hank hesitated, but the steel in her gaze made him think better of refusing. He poured her another whiskey, neat, silently vowing it would be her last. As the night wore on, the bar emptied out, leaving Cassandra alone with her thoughts and her drinks. The alcohol had dulled the sharp edges of her pain, replacing it with a bitter resolve. Around midnight, Hank gently suggested it was time for her to head home. "Need me to call you a cab, miss?" Cassandra waved him off, fumbling in her purse for her car keys. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to get out of here." Hank reached out to stop her, but Cassandra was already stumbling towards the door. As she stumbled into the parking lot, Cassandra managed to get her car started, the engine roaring to life in the quiet night. She pulled out of the parking lot, her vision blurred and her reactions dangerously slow. The winding coastal road stretched out before her, a ribbon of asphalt barely visible in the moonlight. As she drove, Cassandra's mind was a chaotic whirl of emotions: anger at Dominic and Jessica's betrayal, shame at not having seen the signs earlier, fear of the uncertain future that now lay ahead of her. The speedometer crept higher as she pressed down on the accelerator. It was on a particularly treacherous curve that disaster struck. Cassandra's dulled reflexes failed her, and she took the turn too fast. She felt the car begin to slide, tires screeching against the asphalt. In a moment of terrifying clarity, she realized her mistake, but it was too late. The guardrail gave way with a sickening crunch of metal, and suddenly Cassandra was airborne. Then darkness consumed her as the car plummeted over the cliff's edge, tumbling end over end towards the jagged rocks below. The first rays of dawn were just breaking over the horizon when Officer Liam Murphy received the call. A jogger had spotted a wrecked car at the bottom of Whispering Cliffs, a notorious stretch of coastline. Murphy, a seasoned member of Millhaven's small police force, felt a sense of dread as he made his way to the scene. The sight that greeted him was grim. The car, a silver sedan, was barely recognizable, having been crushed by the impact and battered by the waves. As the rescue team worked to extract the vehicle from its precarious position, Murphy began the somber task of piecing together what had happened. The license plate, miraculously still intact, quickly identified the car as belonging to Cassandra Blunt. Murphy felt his heart sink. He knew Cassandra, as did most people in Millhaven. The thought of delivering this news to her family weighed heavily on him. As the morning progressed, and the full extent of the tragedy became clear, whispers began to circulate through the town. Cassandra Blunt, dead in what appeared to be a drunk driving accident. It seemed impossible, completely out of character for the woman everyone knew as responsible and level-headed. Detective Sarah Watson called in from the nearest city to lead the investigation, sensed there was more to the story. Her keen eye noted details that didn't quite add up. The lack of skid marks on the road, suggesting no attempt to brake. The odd angle of the car's trajectory off the cliff. The fact that Cassandra had been drinking alone, something her friends swore she never did. When Watson arrived at the Blunt residence to break the news, she was struck by the palpable tension in the air. Dominic Blunt's reaction to his wife's death seemed oddly muted, tinged with guilt. And the presence of Jessica Lawrence, Cassandra's sister, in the house at such an early hour raised immediate red flags. In the days that followed Cassandra's death, Detective Watson immersed herself in the investigation, peeling back layers of Millhaven's seemingly idyllic surface to reveal the turmoil beneath. Her first step was to retrace Cassandra's final hours, a task that led her to the rusty anchor and its reluctant bartender, Hank. Hank's account of Cassandra's state on the night of her death painted a picture of a woman in deep emotional distress. She was knocking him back like there was no tomorrow, he told Watson, guilt-edged. On his weathered face, I tried to stop her from driving. This testimony conflicted sharply with everything Watson had heard about Cassandra from friends and colleagues. The woman they described was cautious, responsible, not someone who would drink to excess and then get behind the wheel. The detective's suspicions deepened. Watson's next focus was on Dominic Blunt and Jessica Lawrence. Their behavior since Cassandra's death had been odd, to say the least. Instead of grieving separately, they seemed to be leaning on each other for support, their interactions marked by meaningful glances and hushed conversations that would abruptly cease when others approached. A breakthrough came when Watson interviewed Cassandra's closest friend, Olivia Chin. At first, Olivia was reluctant to speak ill of the dead or cause more pain to the family. But as Watson gently pressed, the floodgates opened. Cassandra had confided in me just days before. Before it happened, Olivia admitted, her voice quavering. She suspected Dominic was having an affair with Jessica. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Watson immediately sought to corroborate this information. Digging deeper into Dominic and Jessica's recent activities, bank records showed suspicious transactions, hotel bookings, expensive gifts that aligned with times Dominic had claimed to be on business trips. As the evidence mounted, Watson brought Dominic and Jessica in for separate interviews. Under the detective's relentless questioning, their carefully constructed alibis began to crumble. It was Jessica who broke first. Yes, we were having an affair, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. Cassandra found out that night. We had a huge fight, all three of us. But I swear, we didn't know she'd left the house after we went. Dominic, confronted with Jessica's confession, finally admitted to the affair, but vehemently denied any involvement in Cassandra's death. We made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice hollow with regret. But I loved Cassandra. I would never have wanted this. Watson believed they were telling the truth about not directly causing Cassandra's death, but she knew their actions had set the tragic events in motion. The detective's report painted a clear picture. Cassandra, distraught after discovering her husband's infidelity with her own sister, had sought solace in alcohol. Her decision to drive in that state, while ultimately her own, was the direct result of the emotional trauma inflicted by Dominic and Jessica's betrayal. In the end, no criminal charges were filed in relation to Cassandra's death, but in the court of public opinion, Dominic and Jessica were already condemned. The truth of their affair spread through Millhaven like wildfire, forever tarnishing their reputations and ensuring that Cassandra's death would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As time passed, the raw pain of the events began to dull, but their impact on Millhaven remained. The town would eventually regain its outward appearance of tranquility, but its inhabitants carried with them the knowledge that beneath the calm surface of small-town life, passions and secrets could swirl with deadly force. The tragedy of Cassandra Blunt had forever changed the soul of Millhaven, leaving an indelible mark on all who called it home. On a sweltering July afternoon in 2019, the facade of suburban bliss was shattered in a way that would haunt the community for years to come. At the center of this tragedy were the Hendersons. Thaddeus, a 45-year-old investment banker with a reputation for his work ethic and community involvement, and his wife Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor known for her vibrant personality and infectious laugh. They had been fixtures in the community for over a decade, their seemingly perfect marriage the envy of many. Next door lived the Coopers, Elaine, a widow, and her 19-year-old son Liam, a college sophomore home for the summer. The Coopers had moved in 5 years ago, and while they kept to themselves more than most, they were generally well-liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted that these ordinary lives would collide in such a catastrophic way. Thaddeus Henderson had always been driven by ambition. Born to working-class parents in rural Iowa, he had clawed his way up the social ladder through sheer determination and an almost obsessive work ethic. By his early 30s, he had established himself as a rising star at a financial company. His colleagues admired his sharp analytical mind, and his clients appreciated his no-nonsense approach to wealth management. Margot Sinclair, as she was known before her marriage, had a different trajectory. The daughter of a college professor and an artist, she grew up in a household that valued creativity and self-expression. She studied modern dance at the university, dreaming of a career on stage. However, a knee injury in her senior year derailed those plans, leading her to pivot towards yoga and wellness coaching. Their paths crossed at a charity gala in 2003. Thaddeus, already successful but lacking in social graces, was immediately drawn to Margot's vivacity and charm. For Margot, Thaddeus represented stability and the promise of a comfortable life that would allow her to pursue her passions without financial worry. They married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. The early years of their marriage were happy ones. Thaddeus' career continued to flourish, and he took pride in providing Margot with the life he felt she deserved. Margot, for her part, threw herself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and attending social events that were crucial for Thaddeus' networking. She also began teaching yoga part-time at an upscale studio, finding fulfillment and helping others achieve balance and inner peace. But as the years wore on, cracks began to appear in their carefully constructed life. Thaddeus' work hours grew longer, his ambition pushing him to chase ever bigger deals and clients. He was rarely home before 9 p.m., and even when he was physically present, his mind was often elsewhere, constantly checking his phone for emails or market updates. Margot, approaching her 40s, found herself increasingly restless. The yoga classes and charity committees that once filled her days now felt hollow. She began to question the choices that had led her to this point, wondering if she had traded her dreams for a gilded cage. The couple's failure to conceive, despite years of trying, added another layer of strain to their relationship. By the summer of 2019, the Hendersons' marriage was a carefully maintained facade. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the golden couple. Thaddeus continued to excel at work, recently closing a deal that put him in line for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes were more popular than ever, her students drawn to her warmth and apparent serenity. But behind closed doors they were virtual strangers. Conversations, when they happened, were perfunctory and centered around schedules and social obligations. Physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, each touch laden with unspoken resentments and unfulfilled expectations. Neither Thaddeus nor Margot was willing to admit, even to themselves, how far they had drifted apart. It was easier to maintain the illusion, to go through the motions of a happy marriage, than to confront the emptiness that had grown between them. Little did they know that this unacknowledged chasm in their relationship was about to become the catalyst for a tragedy that would shatter not just their lives, but the entire community of Riverside. The Coopers had moved into the house next door to the Hendersons in 2014, following the death of Elaine Cooper's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper, a respected oncologist. Reginald had succumbed to the very disease he had spent his life fighting, leaving Elaine to raise their son Liam alone. Elaine, a soft-spoken librarian, had initially struggled to adjust to life in the new community. The move from their modest home in St. Paul had been necessary to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their old house. But the affluent suburb felt alien to her. She found solace in her books and in tending to the garden that soon became the envy of the neighborhood. Liam Cooper was 14 when they moved in, a lanky, introverted teenager more comfortable with computers than with people. The transition to a new school had been difficult, and he often found himself the target of bullies who mocked his second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor. It was during this time that Thaddeus Henderson had taken Liam under his wing, offering him a job mowing lawns and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Liam had blossomed. The awkward teen grew into a handsome young man, his natural intelligence finally finding an outlet in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his growing confidence, Liam remained devoted to his mother. He worried about her isolation and loneliness, and made a point of coming home most weekends, even when his friends were planning parties or road trips. It was on one of these weekend visits in early June that he first encountered Margot Henderson in a new light. Elaine had always been grateful for the Hendersons' kindness, particularly Margot's efforts to include her in neighborhood activities. She often spoke of Margot's generosity, unaware of the complex emotions brewing beneath the surface of her son's polite nods. The spark that ignited the affair between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened on a balmy evening in early June, during one of the Hendersons' legendary summer barbecues. Thaddeus, as usual, was holding court near the grill, regaling his colleagues with tales of his latest financial coup. Margot, feeling particularly isolated amidst the crowd, had retreated to the relative quiet of the pool house to replenish the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly dragged to the party by his mother, chose that moment to seek refuge from the noise and forced socializing. He entered the pool house not realizing it was occupied and found Margot struggling with a large bag of ice. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. He moved to help her with the ice, their hands brushing. They stood there, momentarily frozen, the cold of the ice contrasting sharply with the heat building between them. It was Margot who broke the silence, her voice husky as she thanked him. Liam, usually so articulate, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter set the stage for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, Margot and Liam found themselves manufacturing reasons to be in each other's company. It started innocently enough, Margot asking Liam for help with her laptop, Liam offering to help in her garden. Each interaction was charged with an undercurrent of attraction that they both tried to ignore. Their first kiss happened almost a month after the barbecue. Liam had been helping Margot set up for one of her yoga classes in the park. As they finished, a sudden summer storm broke out. They ran for shelter under a nearby gazebo, laughing and breathless. As the rain poured down around them, Margot looked at Liam and felt a surge of desire she hadn't experienced in years. Before she could think better of it, she leaned in and kissed him. From that point, their affair escalated quickly. They were reckless, driven by a combination of Liam's youthful passion and Margot's desperation to feel alive again. They met in secluded spots around town, in the back row of the local cinema, in a hidden corner of the public library, and, most dangerously, in the Henderson home when Thaddeus was at work. Each encounter left them craving more, the gulf in their ages forgotten in the heat of their stolen moments. Margot felt rejuvenated, rediscovering parts of herself she thought long lost. Liam, for his part, was intoxicated by Margot's experience and the taboo nature of their relationship. But as the summer wore on, the strain of maintaining their secret began to show. Close calls became more frequent, a neighbor almost catching them in an embrace. A suspicious glance from Elaine when Margot's name came up too often in conversation. The guilt, too, started to weigh on them both. Liam struggled with the knowledge that he was betraying Thaddeus, a man who had been nothing but kind to him. Margot found herself lying more and more to her husband, each deception another crack in the foundation of her marriage. Yet despite the risks and the guilt, neither seemed able to end the affair. They were caught in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the devastating consequences that loomed on the horizon. July 15, 2019, dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. It was a Monday, and Riverside stirred to life as its residents prepared for another week of work and routine. For Thaddeus Henderson, it began like any other day. He rose early, donned one of his impeccably tailored suits, and left for the office before Margot had even stirred from sleep. Margot woke later, her mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Thaddeus had informed her the night before that he would be working late, a crucial client dinner that could seal his partnership deal. For Margot, this meant an opportunity. She sent a text to Liam, her heart racing as she suggested he come over in the afternoon. Liam, who had been agonizing over the affair for days, saw the message as a chance to end things. Face to face. He replied with a simple, okay, resolving to break it off before the situation spiraled further out of control. The day passed slowly for both of them. Margot went through the motions of her morning yoga class, her usual serenity replaced by a nervous energy that her students couldn't help but notice. Liam, at his summer job, found it hard to focus on the lines of code on his screen, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Margot and the conversation to come. At 2:30 p.m., Liam made his way next door, glancing furtively around to ensure none of the neighbors were watching. Margot ushered him in quickly, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. It was Liam who broke the silence, starting to say that they needed to talk. But Margot, misreading his intention and driven by a desperate need to feel desired, cut him off with a passionate kiss. Despite his reservations, Liam found himself responding, his resolve weakening in the face of Margot's intensity. What happened next was a blur of discarded clothes and tangled limbs as they made their way to the master bedroom. All thoughts of ending the affair were temporarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddeus Henderson sat in his office frowning at his computer screen. The numbers for the client presentation weren't adding up, and he knew he'd have to redo a significant portion of his work. Frustration mounting, he made a snap decision. He would go home, regroup, and return to the office later to finish up before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddeus' car pulled into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's beat-up Honda parked a little way down the street, but thought nothing of it. Probably helping Elaine with some errand, he mused as he unlocked the front door. The house was quiet as Thaddeus entered, but something felt off. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, unusual for Margot at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Frowning, he climbed the stairs, the noise growing louder as he approached the master bedroom. What Thaddeus saw when he opened the door would be forever seared into his memory. His wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old guy he had mentored and trusted. Then, with a roar of rage and pain, Thaddeus lunged forward. His hands, so used to manipulating numbers and shaking on business deals, now curled into fists as he grabbed Liam, yanking him off the bed. Margot screamed, scrambling to cover herself and separate the two men, but her efforts were in vain. Thaddeus's first punch caught Liam squarely in the jaw, sending the younger man stumbling backward. But Liam, driven by adrenaline and fear, fought back. The two men grappled, crashing into the dresser, sending framed photos and trinkets scattering across the floor. In the chaos, no one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that fell from the dresser's top. No one saw it until Thaddeus, in a fit of blind rage, grabbed it and brought it down on Liam's head with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Liam crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his motionless form. Margot's scream pierced the air, as the full horror of what had just transpired hit them all in that moment as storm clouds gathered outside and sirens wailed in the distance. The lives of everyone involved changed irrevocably. The idyllic facade of Riverside had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of the community. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, curiosity mingling with apprehension, as squad cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the Henderson residence. The first officers on the scene were met with a tableau of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they found a shell-shocked Thaddeus Henderson, his hands covered in blood, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot barely clothed and hysterical. The room bore all the hallmarks of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, shattered glass, and smears of blood on the hardwood floor. Detective Ava Rossi, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, took charge of the scene. Her first priority was securing medical attention for Liam Cooper. As paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize him, Rossi began the delicate process of piecing together the events that had led to this tragedy. Thaddeus, still in a state of shock, was taken into custody without resistance. Margot was separately questioned. Their stories, fragmented and emotional, painted a picture of a long-simmering marital discord that had exploded into violence. As word spread through the neighborhood, a crowd began to gather at the police cordon. Among them was Elaine Cooper, who collapsed in grief when informed of her son's critical condition. She was quickly whisked away to the hospital, where Liam was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. The investigation moved quickly. Forensics teams combed through the Henderson home, collecting evidence and taking photographs. The crystal bookend, now a potential murder weapon, was carefully bagged and tagged. Neighbors were interviewed, their statements adding context to the relationships between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor recalled hearing raised voices from the Henderson house earlier that afternoon, but had dismissed it as a television playing too loudly. Another mentioned seeing Liam enter the Henderson home around 2:30 p.m., noting it because he thought it odd given Thaddeus' usual work schedule. As night fell, the gravity of the situation became clear. Liam Cooper was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m., never having regained consciousness. The charge against Thaddeus Henderson was elevated from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Margot, racked with guilt and facing intense scrutiny, admitted to the affair with Liam. Her statement, given through tears at the police station, provided a timeline of their relationship and the events leading up to that fateful afternoon. Thaddeus, advised by his hastily retained attorney, remained silent, but his colleagues at the company painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, working long hours in pursuit of a partnership that had seemed within reach. None, however, had suspected the depth of his marital problems or the capacity for violence that had been unleashed. The case against Thaddeus Henderson was building, but Rossi knew that in the court of public opinion, there would be no clear villains or heroes in this story, only victims, each in their own way, of the secrets and lies that had finally come to light in the most devastating manner possible. But no one has ever expected the plot twist that's about to come. And twist? That will shock everyone, including the Hendersons. The Henderson trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the events that had shaken Riverside to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Thaddeus Henderson as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally murdered a young man in the prime of his life. Talbot's words were measured but impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Henderson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney countered with a narrative of his own. He portrayed Thaddeus as a devoted husband and pillar of the community, pushed to the brink by a betrayal of the deepest kind. Sterling suggested that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to cause Liam's fatal injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, and character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of both Thaddeus and Liam. But it was Margot Henderson's testimony that captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days on the stand, she laid bare the disintegration of her marriage and the evolution of her relationship with Liam. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Thaddeus had walked in on them and the horror of watching the confrontation unfold. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had driven her husband to temporary insanity, but Margot held firm, accepting her part in the tragedy, while insisting that nothing justified Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's testimony was brief but powerful. Still grief-stricken, she spoke of her son's kindness and his dreams for the future, all cut short in an act of violence. Her quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Thaddeus Henderson. Against his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand. His testimony was a study in contrasts, moments of apparent remorse interspersed with flashes of the anger that had led to Liam's death. He spoke of the pressure he'd been under at work, the growing distance in his marriage, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity. When describing the fight with Liam, Thaddeus claimed he had never intended to cause serious harm, that he had simply lost control. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses from the field of psychology were called to provide insight into the minds of those involved in the tragic events. Dr. Cho explained that Thaddeus's actions could be understood through the lens of what psychologists call intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by episodes of violent, aggressive behavior disproportionate to the situation. She pointed to Thaddeus's high-stress job, his unexpressed marital dissatisfaction, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing factors to his violent outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho conceded that while these factors could explain Thaddeus' behavior, they did not excuse it. She emphasized that many individuals face similar stressors without resorting to violence. The defense called a specialist in marriage and family therapy to testify about the psychological impact of infidelity. Friedman described the profound sense of betrayal and loss of identity that a person may experience upon discovering a spouse's affair. He likened it to a form of psychological trauma, capable of triggering extreme emotional responses. The psychological analyses presented during the trial offered a complex picture of human behavior and motivation. They highlighted how a combination of personal history, societal expectations, and immediate circumstances can collide to create a perfect storm of tragedy. After 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Thaddeus Henderson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. After a short recess to consider all factors, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver her sentence. Citing the violent nature of the crime balanced against Thaddeus' lack of prior criminal history and the unique circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddeus was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the crowd's reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. But all agreed on one thing: the events that had unfolded in Riverside would leave an indelible mark on the community for years to come.